Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Peter, and thanks so much for tuning in for another episode of Posing with Peter. Now if you're new here, that's okay. You can check out my previous posing tutorials right here on this channel. But in today's episode, we'll be going over how to pose one of Hot Toys' most well-engineered figures to date, the die-cast Iron Man Mk50 from Avengers Infinity War. Now, similar to previous episodes, we'll be starting things off nice and slow at first, but we'll ramp up the edits as we progress. And since the Mk50 is the first Iron Man figure for many collectors out there, I'll be going over some best practices and safety tips first before diving into the poses. But not to worry, if you're already familiar with the ins and outs of this figure, feel free to use the designated timestamps in the description box below. And lastly, just a friendly reminder, I'm not sponsored by Hot Toys nor Sideshow. These figures are from my own personal collection, so while I really do hope to inspire you to pose your figures, please do so very carefully and at your own risk. With that being said, let's get on with the show. Alright, and so here we have Iron Man in a pretty standard out-of-the-box pose, and so we'll be going over articulation safety tips first, starting from the head down. Now, one of the cool features here is the extended neck peg that's hidden underneath the helmet. It allows the head to be tilted pretty far back, which is great if you want to pull off any horizontal flight poses. Now moving down to the upper body, the arms can be pulled out to the side before being moved around. Additionally, it's important to know that the inner shoulder joints can also pivot for a wider range of motion. Now heads up, the armored shoulder pads are attached to the arm by a spring-loaded mechanism that's not removable, so be careful when lifting them up. However, one of the coolest bits of engineering here is that this mechanism is a two-part system. It can be pulled up and above the shoulder in order to clear any potential collision points. Now this is very important and will come up a lot throughout this video. And moving along, another really cool engineering feature is that the bicep armor plate can slide up and down to allow for some pretty extreme poses at the forearm. Just be sure to maneuver the bicep plate out of the way before making any adjustments to the forearm. Also, be mindful that the entire arm can swivel at the joint underneath the shoulder pads. Now, I do want to point out that because the Mk50 is very form-fitting, the figure itself suffers from many collision points that can lead to scraping, paint fading, and damage, so we'll really want to utilize that shoulder mechanism when rotating the arm. And, as a friendly reminder, be sure to push the arms back into the body for a sleeker appearance. Now when it comes to the lower torso, there are two separations that can be extended by pulling up on the abdominal section. Doing so allows the sternum and abdomen to swivel with a much wider range of motion. Additionally, this allows the chest to be pulled forward for some ab crunch or to lean back. But be mindful not to twist the body too much, otherwise the sharp edges may collide and chip away. Now moving on to the legs, we'll want to be careful of another potential collision point along the thighs. Fortunately, like previous figures, the hips do have 4 articulated flaps that can swing up and out of the way for better clearance. Now, another awesome design feature are the adjustable ball joints that are hidden within the groin. The instruction manual only indicates 2 settings for adjustment, but there are actually 3 if you include the current neutral position. Now, if you watch closely, you can see that pulling down on the thigh allows it to click into place, but you can actually go one click further to achieve some really aggressive poses. And lastly, the boots do have articulated ankles and toes that can point up and down. However, it's worth mentioning that pointing the toes down causes a very large gap at the joint. Also, the top side of the boot slides around for flexibility, but it has a tendency to incorrectly slide underneath the shin guard, so be careful to maneuver that plate first before moving the ankles back into position. And that's pretty much it for our safety tips. Now, there may be a few more when it comes to the accessories, but we'll go over those when the time comes. With everything that we've learned so far, it's time to get on with the posing. Alright, and so the first pose of this episode is a fairly easy but recognizable one, and it's when Iron Man holds both of his arms out with his repulsor blasts. Now, the hands we'll be using are the sculpted open hands, but feel free to use the ones with articulated fingers if you prefer more control. And so to remove the existing hands from the figure, simply hold onto the forearm with one hand while gently pulling at the wrist with your other hand. And to attach the sculpted hands, firmly push them onto the wrist pegs until they fit snugly into place. Now once we've got those jazz hands attached, we'll want to pull the arms out of the body first before moving them into position. And, as mentioned in our safety tips, we'll want to be mindful to utilize that shoulder mechanism by pulling up on the armor first before rotating the arm. Once you've rotated the arm into position, Carefully maneuver the shoulder joint towards the chest to allow a better clearance, and then push the arm back into the body. Then we can point the chin forward and to his left, followed by micro adjustments of the left arm, like rotating the bicep inwards, pushing the shoulder in even more, and rotating the hand to the upright position. Once that's done, we can use the same techniques to safely rotate the other arm up and into position. And as a friendly reminder, we'll want to slide the bicep plate up and out of the way before bending the arm in towards his chest. Also, be sure to extend the torso to allow his body to lean into the pose later. Now moving on to the legs, you'll want to raise those hip flaps up in order to avoid any potential collisions. Then, simply pull the thigh down just one notch, followed by the same steps for the other leg. And once the legs are cleared from any risk of scraping, simply move them outwards for a wider stance. Now at this point, you can choose to bring either leg to the front, but I went with the left leg. Once that's done, simply bend the knees to your liking, place him on the table to find his center of balance, and there's the pose for the most part. Now personally, I felt that his right arm was a bit too high, so I went back in and made some minor adjustments like lowering the arm closer to his chest and rotating the palm just a tad. And there we have it, the last thing Squidward saw before being blown out into space. Alright, now for this next pose, we'll be utilizing some of the accessories included with the figure, namely the Nano Booster Wings, sometimes referred to as Flight Stabilizers, and the Nano Repulsor Cannon, otherwise known as the Lobster Claw. Now, the first thing we'll be doing is switching out the right forearm for the Repulsor Cannon, and to do so, simply grip the bicep and elbow area with one hand while pulling the forearm away with your other hand. Also, it's worth mentioning that the attachable weapons must be installed on the specific corresponding arms. They're not interchangeable, so be sure to read the instructions very carefully to avoid damage. But once it's equipped, we can begin moving it into position by raising his arm up while being mindful not to scrape the shoulder pad against the back. And since he'll be virtually aiming down the sights of the cannon, we'll want to raise the arm up pretty high while also tilting his head up to match his line of sight. Next, we can move on to the left arm by pulling it out to the side, followed by raising it up to the chest area. Now remember to slide the bicep plate out of the way before bringing the forearm in towards the chest. Now when it comes to removing any armor plates, I prefer using these nylon prying tools that you can buy online. They're rigid enough to detach any pieces but without causing any paint damage either. And so once you remove the back plate, simply attach the booster wings by firmly squeezing the middle region. Heads up, this accessory is sharp and has additional articulated wings that are very fragile, so be extra careful when handling this accessory. Now moving down to the legs, we'll want to raise those flaps before widening his stance to avoid any scraping. But for this part, similar to our last pose, you can customize which leg is brought to the front, along with how wide his stance will be. Personally, I decided to bring his right leg forward, so I pulled his left leg down at the ball joint in order to push it further back without scraping the rear side of the thigh. Doing so allows for a wider stance, which implies his anticipation for the recoil of the blast. But once you've got his legs dialed in, simply close those flaps, carefully pull each of the articulated wings out, and there you have it. Alright, now we're getting into the slightly more advanced posing. Now for this one, we'll be utilizing quite a few accessories, and for starters, we have the left hand cannon, which is one of the cooler looking weapons in my opinion. And so the first thing we'll want to do is remove the left hand, followed by the armor plate on the forearm. Now as you can see here, I tend to struggle with removing the armor since I have short fingernails, and so to demonstrate how easy it is with the nylon prying tool, I simply wedge the flat end of the tool into the opening on the forearm, and gently tug until it barely loosens the two inner pegs. Voila! Now when attaching the hand cannon to his arm, be careful not to squeeze it too tightly. Doing so could make it difficult to remove later, or may even cause the pegs to break off into the arm. And once the cannon is equipped, simply reattach the left fist. Now for this next part, I temporarily raised the left arm up just to give you a sense of what it looked like to have him aiming down the cannon. Personally, I chose not to do this for the final pose, but that's the beauty of these figures over statues in my opinion. The possibilities to customize the look and pose of your figures are endless. But in any case, for this mid-flight pose, we'll want to bring the shoulders up while leaving the hands out to the side for a more confident and heroic appearance. And moving down to the legs, we'll want to pull the left thigh up to about 45 degrees while bending the knee to about 90 degrees. Then, simply pull the right leg in just a bit and point the right foot down to really sell the mid-flight pose. Next, we'll want to extend the torso for better articulation, then pull the chest down for a more aggressive look. Once that's done, we can swap out the right fist for the blade-wielding hand. Now, a quick tip. When opening the hand, be sure to pull on the 4 fingers and not the thumb. Otherwise, you may damage the glue that holds the thumb in place. And here we have the blue energy blade. Now, I know some collectors were rather disappointed in this final product, but I personally don't mind. I'm just grateful that Hot Toys even made it. And so once you've equipped the blade, simply attach his hand back to the arm. Once that's done, it's time to bring in the dynamic flight stand and the nano booster wings. Oh, trusty prying tool. What would I do without you? And so once again, for the booster wings, simply squeeze the middle region to attach it firmly. Next, we can make some minor adjustments to the arms by bringing the shoulders up and over the trapezius. Now when using the dynamic flight stand, I personally attached a clamp just below the sternum since there are 2 small indentations on the sides of the torso. Also, while I didn't exactly zoom in on this area, you'll want to place the bottom side of the left foot against the pole. Doing so helps balance the figure in place and also distributes some of the figure's hefty weight away from the clamp. Once he's floating in place, simply lift his head up, widen the arms out a little further, and there's our pose. Alright, now this next pose is pretty iconic but also a bit tricky, and that's the superhero landing, otherwise referred to as the ground pound. Now, although this pose looks pretty awesome in movies and in photos, I'm personally not that big of a fan because it's a bit deceiving. Truth be told, it only really looks good from one specific angle, that being from the lower left side. But in any case, to achieve this pose, we're going to have to take full advantage of everything we've learned so far. So the first thing we'll want to do is extend all the limbs. I mean everything, like pull the torso up, tilt the head back, pull the arms out, and bring those legs down. Once that's done, we can begin working on the fundamentals of this pose. Carefully rotate the left thigh up as much as possible, then bend the knee about 90 degrees. Next, we can move on to the other limbs by slightly rotating the left arm back and bringing the right thigh forward with a similar 90-degree bend at the knee. Then we can rotate the right arm forward and place him on the table and begin fine-tuning the details. Now, I will say that one of the great things about this pose is that it's pretty customizable from this point going forward. Specifically, you can choose from so many options like using open palm hands versus fists, equipping weapons like the hand cannon or the energy blades to the left arm, the amount of body twist on his torso, or even how much to extend the left leg in or out. And so for this video, I chose to keep it pretty simple by using fists on both hands while attaching the booster wings for a more angular appearance. But once that's done, we can bend the left arm out a little more to the side, bring the right shoulder in, and there's our superhero landing. Alright, now we're getting into the really complex poses where we go head to head with the Mad Titan Thanos. Now, if you own this figure but aren't too confident with posing him, be sure to check out episode 2 of Posing with Peter. We covered some important fundamentals for Thanos that'll definitely come in handy throughout the remainder of this video. Otherwise, let's get back to posing. Now, moving forward, we'll be utilizing several items that were included in the accessory pack, and for this pose, we'll need the foot clamps that look like chicken feet, along with the battering rams. Now, heads up, I personally don't recommend attaching the battering rams long term because the black foam padding immediately left some unsightly sticky residue on my figure's arms, so proceed with caution. But in any case, we'll want to remove all 4 limbs to equip the accessories, and to do so, simply grip the arms at the biceps to pull the forearms off. And for the legs, firmly grip the thigh area on or above the knee while pulling the calves to remove them. Heads up, they are die cast and pretty heavy, so be careful when handling them. And so here we have Iron Man plucked and ready to go in the oven. Seriously though, don't do that. And so now we'll raise his arms up to about the chest area, and because the arms will be pretty far apart, we'll want to be careful when maneuvering the shoulder pads over the rear air flaps. Also, remember to slide those bicep plates out of the way. Now, when attaching the battering rams, bending the forearms in about 90 degrees allows them to easily slide into place. Now moving down to the legs, you'll want to be mindful of which foot clamp you're installing. They may appear identical, but they each have designated cutouts for their corresponding pegs. And once you've inserted it onto the peg, firmly push them together until it clicks into place. Just be careful not to jam your skin in the process. Once that's done, we'll want to raise those hip flaps so we can pull the legs down for a wider stance. Then we'll just bring his right leg forward while bending the knee. Meanwhile, his left leg will be moved back and straightened out. Also, be sure to keep the legs pretty far apart to prevent the clamps from colliding. And once we've got the legs dialed in, we can simply point the front hooks up while pointing the rear hooks down. Then we can place him on the table to begin fine-tuning the details. Now that's pretty much it for Iron Man, so it's time to bring in the big bad purple dude. Now for Thanos, we'll want to utilize his angry face, the sculpted bent arm, and the articulated gauntlet hand, since we'll be attaching the nano gauntlet restraint, which is such a cool accessory. I mean, not only are the finger restraints articulated, but this thing has a hidden magnet in the palm that adheres to the metal within the gauntlet. I mean, I don't think many collectors knew about that until videos of the final product surfaced online, so you gotta give it to Hot Toys for their brilliant engineering. In any case, once you've attached the restraint, be sure to keep the palm face up so it's visible for the pose. Then we can start moving Thanos into position. Simply turn his head left towards Iron Man, bring his right arm back, twist the torso just a bit, raise his left leg up while bending the knee about 45 degrees, and pull his right leg back for a wider aggressive stance. Now, because he's a massive figure, the next part requires tons of micro adjustments and a lot of patience, but we can use his bulkiness to our advantage. Through some tweaking and vigilance, eventually we can get him to stand on his own 2 feet. And once you find his center of balance, simply bring Iron Man in for his close-up. And there's our pose. Alright, now this next pose is from that pretty iconic moment when Iron Man actually landed a solid hit on Thanos. Unfortunately, all it got him was a drop of blood. Now the only accessory we'll be using here is the power mallet. And it's pretty important to know that it can only be attached to his left arm, so be sure to carefully align the grooves at the opening with his bicep when attaching it. But once you've got it equipped, we'll want to raise his left arm up while bending the forearm in just to imply the mid-action thrust. And to really sell the pose, we'll want to twist the upper torso right while tilting his head down and to the left. Then we'll want to slightly swing his right arm back with a minor bend at the forearm, then lift the shoulder pad up and over the trapezius. Now moving down to the legs, we'll want to pull the left leg down so we can safely move it back. Then we can bring the right leg forward, and remember to bend the knees. Now heads up, the figure won't stand up on its own like this, but that's okay. He'll be leaning into the punch against Thanos in a bit, so we can put him aside for now. And for Thanos, be sure to attach the long extended arm with the articulated gauntlet hand. We'll be using this configuration to prop him up from the table. And so, once you've got that left arm attached, simply raise it up to the chest level. Then we'll want to bring his left leg in while bending the knee to about 90 degrees, followed by extending both his right leg and right arm out. Once that's done, we can place him on the table to find his balancing point. And for reference, here's what he looks like from the other side. Now heads up, be mindful of the soft knee pads. They could become warped if left unchecked for too long. And that's pretty much it for Thanos, so now we can tag Iron Man back in. Now this next part just requires a few minor adjustments to the arm placement and Thanos' head, but with a little patience, it all works out in the end. All that for a drop of blood. Alright, now this next pose is when Tony tried desperately to repel Thanos from closing in before being overpowered. Now this pose may appear complicated at first, but if you look closely, we've technically already covered it since the upper body uses the dual repulsors from our first pose, while the lower body borrows from the ground pound. And since I mentioned that the editing will ramp up, we'll pretty much breeze through this one. And so to achieve this pose, you can choose either to equip the figure with the sculpted repulsor hands or the ones with the articulated fingers. Then tilt the head to his right, and extend the right arm up above eye level while carefully maneuvering the shoulder pad over the air flap. Next, rotate the left arm forward just a bit while bringing the hand to about the mid-chest area. Now moving down to his legs, simply open those flaps and pull that left leg down before moving it back. And remember to bend the knee about 90 degrees while also pointing the toes out. Next, bring his right leg up with the knee also bent about 90 degrees, but remember to flatten the boot onto the table to assist with balancing the figure. Now heads up, if he topples over from leaning too much to the side, we can swivel the thighs until we find the balancing point. Once that's done, we can fine-tune the details like his hand placement or the amount of head tilt. Now that's pretty much it for Iron Man. And since Thanos will be in the midst of his stride, we'll want to bring his right leg forward while twisting his pelvis to the left. Then we'll bring his gauntlet fist up just above the chest, followed by rotating his right arm back. And remember to tilt his head down too. Once we've got the main gist of his pose down, simply proceed with minor adjustments to his legs, boots, or even his arms until you find his center of balance. Oh, and since I actually forgot while filming, remember to pop on that battle damage faceplate if you own the accessory pack. And there you have it. Alright, and here we have Tony's last stand, his final attempt to give everything he's got. Now for this pose, we'll actually be utilizing the RDJ head sculpt. And so the first thing we'll want to do is swap out the entire head by firmly pulling at the neck. Then we'll attach the armored neck piece by placing it onto the figure from the back side of the neck peg. Once that's done, simply plop his head onto the body. Now for his right hand, we'll want to use the fist that has the L-shaped cutout since that corresponds to the Qatar. Once equipped, simply raise his right arm up while tilting his head to the right as well. And just a friendly reminder to rest the shoulder pad over the air flap. Now for this next part, unlike our other poses, we'll want to rotate his left arm all the way up, so be extra careful not to scrape the shoulder pad along the air flap. Also, this does leave a pretty unsightly gap at the shoulder, so you can try tucking the corner of the shoulder pad into the body for a slightly tighter look. And when it comes to his legs, we'll want to pull them down and bring them back just a bit while also bending the knees to imply his struggle. And that's it for Iron Man. Now moving on to Thanos, we'll want to bring his right leg forward and his left leg back for better balance. Then simply rotate the articulated gauntlet face down since he'll be using it to grip Tony's hand. Once that's done, we can briefly put them together just to see how they measure up. And if you like, we can extend the torso back to emphasize Tony's struggle. And lastly comes the trickiest part, which is getting Thanos to grip Tony's forearm while balancing the two. It's almost like a dance both figuratively and literally. But, as always, all it takes is a little patience and some determination. Alright everyone, this is it. For our final pose, we'll be recreating the gut-wrenching moment that caused audience members across the world to gasp in shock and unison as Thanos stabbed Tony through and through. And so for this pose, the items that we'll be using from the accessory pack are the Qatar and battle-damaged nano armor. And so once we've attached those two items together, we can put that aside and begin working on Thanos. Now, since he really leans into the stab, we'll want to start off by bringing his right leg forward and his left leg back to imply his forward movement. Also, we can bring his left arm back, but be sure to angle his gauntlet hand forward. Once that's done, we can equip Thanos with the Qatar on his right hand, followed by some minor adjustments to the legs and pelvis. When it comes to finding his center of balance, it always helps to widen his stance. Now moving on to Tony, we'll want to use the hands with articulated fingers since it'll give us more control over Tony's struggle. And so once we've got them attached, we'll want to raise Tony's left forearm up about 90 degrees while extending his right arm up to about mid-chest level. Next, we'll want to pull the right leg down, then bend the thigh and knee both to about 45 degrees. And for his left leg, pull it down and back just a bit, then swivel his thigh outward for a more natural stance. Now when you bring them close together, be sure to wedge the Qatar under Tony's left arm. And for Tony's right arm, we'll want to bring his forearm inward as much as possible since it'll be hovering right above Thanos' beefy arm. And once we've got them close together, all that's left is fine-tuning the articulated fingers. And so for Tony's right hand, try to maneuver the fingers as if he's holding an invisible ball. And for his left hand, simply keep the thumb and index fingers fairly extended while wrapping the remaining fingers around Thanos' arm. Lastly, tilt his head back as far as possible, and there it is, the end of the Mk50. And there you have it, 9 different poses for your Iron Man Mk50 by Hot Toys. Now, I'm open to feedback and would like to know what you thought in the comments. Was it too long? Not long enough? In the end, I really hope these videos inspire fellow collectors to pose their figures. Now, if you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for allowing me your time. I have a lot of fun making these posing videos for the community, so I can only hope you enjoy them just as much. If you did, feel free to give it a thumbs up, and subscribe for more content like this. If you enjoyed these poses and you're on Instagram, you can follow me at posingwithpeter16. Also, if you're on Facebook and would like to say hi, then come join us over at 6th Scale Network where we chat all things figures. Thanks again so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.